you've defied every statistic. And so it's time to see if your genetic material will work in somebody else's uterus.
I was really lucky to have an easy pregnancy. I really enjoyed it. I knew I wanted to help an LGBTQ family, and yeah, that's what brought me here.
That's Carly and Sammi. Carly used gestational carrier after experiencing 4.5 years of infertility, including 20 transferred embryos over that time. And Sammi, well, she just told you. She chose to be a gestational carrier with a focus on trying to help members of the LGBTQ+ community with their family-building journeys. These days, they're colleagues. They both work for Nodal, a platform that efficiently connects vetted surrogates and intended parents. I honestly can't think of two better individuals to help us out as we dive deep into surrogacy. If you're trying to learn more about surrogacy, this is the episode for you. I'm Dan Bolger, and this is Infertility. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of This is Infertility. As I said, today we're going to dive deep into surrogacy. But before we dive in, I just want to take a second to remind you that we have some resources available for anyone who might want to bring fertility and family-building benefits to their employer at progeny.com/talk-to-HR. Most employers that offer these benefits do so because an employee asked for it. So take advantage of our resources and help bring this life-changing benefit to your employer. All right, we have a lot to cover, so let's start with the first thing people often want to know. What is the step-by-step process of surrogacy?
The first thing is the match, then medical clearance. At the same time as medical clearance and the match, you're going to be doing an insurance review on your surrogate's existing policy. And then after medical clearance is done, which is the main high hurdle to pass, then you go into legal, where you create the gestational carrier agreement, and then escrow, and then embryo transfer.
The steps from the surrogate side are a little bit different. You'll start with an initial questionnaire. It might be on a website or an app on Nodal. Go to our website. Very easy. You'll fill out some pre-qualification questions. With that, if you're pre-qualified, then you'll schedule an intake call. During the intake call, you'll go through a bit more of an in-depth questionnaire where you'll be asked about your medical history, a little bit about your personal history, and then you'll continue forward after signing some consent forms, allowing us to look a little bit deeper into your medical history and reviewing those records. You'll also do a background check, an identity check, just to make sure that everybody on either side is protected and following all the right steps. You'll go through a medical review, which can take a couple weeks sometimes to have your records looked through by a clinician to see if you are a good fit for surrogacy, if it would be safe for you to carry. After a surrogate is medically pre-qualified, then you go into some of the steps like Carly mentioned. You'll make a profile, we'll create your compensation plan, you'll go into the matching process where you'll get to see families, and then once you match, then you kind of go forward. But the surrogate does go through a really thorough screening process before they ever get to matching.
And then one thing that the intended parents, of course, need to be mindful of in this process is making sure that they have the appropriate funds for something that is so incredibly expensive, and the majority of the money that's required needs to actually be placed into escrow prior to the embryo transfer. So it really is sometimes financial planning happening on the intended parent side while the surrogate is going through all the different kinds of vetting.
Okay, so as you see, there are a lot of steps. So the question becomes, about how long does all of this take?
The biggest bottleneck is usually your doctor's office. And most doctors are very busy people who are trying to schedule, as many patients as possible per day. And some doctors' offices can get back to you in a week based on the medical record packet that was sent over, and some doctors sit on it for 6 weeks. So that's the biggest variable question. And then the next question is whether on insurance are you if your surrogate does not have surrogacy-friendly insurance, you'll have to consider whether you want to purchase a private plan, which you can do at any time, but they're very expensive, or whether you want to wait for the Affordable Care Act open enrollment window, which is November, December, and sometimes January, depending on the state. And if you're going to wait for the insurance, that can be the other bottleneck, is if you don't want to move forward because you want to have the more cost-effective insurance plan in place. But legal usually is done within 6 weeks, and then escrow can be done in 2 hours. So it's more about how long does it take your doctor, how open is your doctor, and the surrogate schedule in terms of flying the surrogate in to see your doctor, and then what is your main decision about insurance.
I was expecting the legal part to be a bit more cumbersome, but Carly, who, remember, is a surrogacy lawyer, assured me that the legal parts are usually relatively quick, which is good to know. Okay, so let's talk more about that first step people need to take when embracing surrogacy, and that, of course, is matching with a surrogate. So what are we looking for here? Should it be a priority to find someone local?
It's a lot to wrap your head around to have somebody else carry your child. And often intended parents are trying to think about, well, which variables are under my control? And things like where the surrogate lives is often very important to intended parents. And I do think that this is sometimes not to the intended parent's benefit, because it's a few airplane rides is just not the end of the world. So I do tend to push intended parents to sort of be more flexible, because the goal is to find somebody who you think is great, who your doctor also thinks is great. And because it's hard to find somebody like that, I always tell intended parents that they should try to be open-minded about things like geography, because all of that is surmountable.
I say that to surrogates as well during their matching process when they believe they might want an intended parent close to them, which does have its perks for things like delivery and travel. But my intended parents live across the country from me. They're actually here in New York City. And we have a wonderful relationship. And I always tell surrogates, think about somebody you would want to be having dinner with and introduce your family to. And the logistics on travel can be figured out.
And I think for intended parents, it's much easier once they've actually interacted with a candidate to sort of wrap their minds around, like, oh, no, now I've met Sammi. I don't care that she lives in Oregon now. I just understand her healthy lifestyle and what a great mom she is to her daughter. And I just would have complete faith in her being able to, and me entrusting her with, she was not my surrogate, but I wish she would have been. Yeah. But the other thing that people often think about when it's an intended parent is, they're very risk averse because things are so expensive. And sometimes, a surrogate will say, look, I don't want to have any drugs, or I want a natural, delivery, or I want a doula at the delivery. And sometimes intended parents are like, oh, well, that's not how I would do it, right, if I was the one delivering the kid, so I don't understand it. And I think that it's also to intended parents' benefit to be flexible about things and see whether there's a compromise. For instance, my surrogate had a home birth with her second child. Now, a home birth was never going to be the right answer for me, but we were able to find a hospital that also had a birthing center attached where she could have the tub, but also a doctor right there and the doula. So it's hard to find that right person, and I always suggest that intended parents be open-minded to things where they originally think, oh, no, I would never, to have that conversation to meet that person and see if a compromise would be possible.
Okay, so the key isn't necessarily to find someone local. A broader search might serve you well. But that leads to a big question. If not location, what should you be looking for in a surrogate?
So I think that something that's very simple is actually the most important thing. So there's a continuum of relationships, right, between all business, just wanting to hear about doctor's appointments, and something that's like an auntie or an extended family member. And I think that there are intended parents that want the anti-extended family member, and there are intended parents that prefer sort of the all business. And there are surrogates in both of those camps as well. And so I think it's really important to try to dig deep at the start prior to matching to sort of figure out where you are on the continuum. And, if you lean one way or the other, try to match with somebody who also leans that same way. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I get asked this a lot from surrogate candidates that I speak with, and they'll ask questions like, do I get to talk to the intended parents outside of appointments, or will I get updates on the baby? And there's all sorts of variables to that, but I think, as I said, thinking about somebody, if you want that relationship, are they someone you'd want to be friends with or, again, introduce to your family and your children? But if a surrogate also feels that they want that hands-off, you really need to find that match from the start and not assume you're going to change the relationship type during the journey. So that's why during introduction calls, we definitely go over all of that to make sure that people are going to mesh well.
And I knew personally that we'd had a really hard road when it came to our fertility story, and there was healing that we wanted to do during the time of the pregnancy, and I was not looking to, find out everything that my amazing surrogate ate for lunch, and did you have 1 scoop of tuna versus 2 scoops of tuna? Yeah. I was looking for something that was a little bit more all business, and with my surrogate, it sort of grew organically into something a little bit more. But at the start, I was like, I want to heal. I want to focus on being a parent. I want to take an amazing baby moon that I would not have been able to do if I was, carrying the child. And I want to make the best of what, was not my plan A, of course. But, and then I do also counsel intended parents that the most important thing is that you have a happy surrogate, right? Because a happy surrogate is what results in, hopefully a happy, healthy baby and an ethical, great situation. And so when I started to feel like maybe my surrogate wanted a little bit more from me, like I enlisted my mom, I enlisted my grandpa. I had my mom, sending like some holiday presents to the surrogate's kids, and my grandpa wrote this beautiful love letter to my surrogate, which is now like something treasured because my grandpa has passed, that just said like, you have like, bringing life into our family in this situation was like magical. So it's you want to from the start like think, are you more all business or are you looking for something that's more sort of familial feeling? And then you, as intended parents, you need to be able to adjust to make sure that your surrogate is feeling good, healthy, and supported throughout.
And I think that sparks a good topic of being a traditional couple, a heterosexual couple, where you did have your own challenges coming into needing to find a surrogate. I assume you didn't wake up and decide you wanted to have a surrogate when you were having your, starting your family. But with an LGBTQ family, like the 2 couples that I carried for, when they wanted to start their family, there's, of course, adoption routes as well, but surrogacy was always top of mind. So relationship-wise, I think it made it a little simpler from the start, knowing we wanted to have kind of this big, extended chosen family during our match. So we did let it grow organically too, which I think is the most important, just knowing that journeys can be fluid and they can change. But that is a difference for the surrogate too, looking at which type of journey path you want to go and what type of intended parents.
Okay, so you have to make that first decision pretty mindfully. What kind of relationship would you like to have when matching? It's a personal choice and there's no wrong answer, but just make sure to be mindful. Now, let's get into what usually happens in the days and weeks immediately following the match.
The biggest hurdle is having your doctor say yes, right? So I always say be cautiously optimistic right after matching, but don't fall in love until your doctor gives the thumbs up. And I'm sure you might want to say that also from the surrogate side. I don't know if you counsel on that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of a slow start when it comes to the relationship and communication, just because there is still so many checkpoints to get through. You don't want to get too excited because unfortunately things can happen.
So it is kind of like dating, right? So you've agreed to go on a date with the person and you want to make sure that person is feeling, supported and any concerns are being addressed. But I would think that in most of these circumstances, it's good to kind of be at an arm's length in those starting moments until something forms like a little bit more organically. So I think usually it's kind of more text messaging at the start is my experience. Mm-hmm. Of course, there are outliers or people who handle things differently. But if it is somebody that you never knew before, it's usually more, checking in weekly, maybe via text message and talking about logistics around did she get her period or not, or is the clinic being responsive or not in terms of like the clinic getting everything that they need. And then I think after the medical clearance, there's also sort of, you can fall in love a little bit more at that point. But you still have to make it through legal. And I think that in those moments when, you have a lawyer and the surrogate has a lawyer, you want to make sure that the surrogate's voice is being heard. And so when it comes to that legal, it's great to go through your lawyers and, say to your lawyer, like, hey, can you find out what the surrogate actually cares about? Like, I know we're working on these, like, form documents, but, like, does your surrogate actually, need more childcare than is like typically in a form, or is this someone who's like really loves a prenatal massage, or whatever is actually important to the surrogate? You want to make sure that information makes it into the legal process. So whether or not you choose to do it through your lawyers or choose to have that conversation sort of directly is something to consider. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about like how you counsel surrogates when it comes to the legal piece.
Yeah. I think legal contracts, it just sounds kind of like a big scary word, and it is an intimidating process, especially when it's 50 to 70 pages of legal jargon that, most surrogates probably haven't had to read through before.
Sometimes they could be shorter. Sometimes you could get 35 pages in there.
Man. Mine were, I think, around 60. So, yeah. But I think, reading every single line and, just making sure that you understand what's in there is really important. And yeah, during that time, you might not really talk to the intended parents because you feel as if you should be only communicating with your attorneys. But at the same time, I think it's okay, too, to still be in touch during that time. Yeah.
But after the contract's done, that's when, I hope you're head over heels in love when it comes to like the dating analogy. And that's when you want to set up, the right amount of communication for the people involved. And so I know a lot of people in their contracts say, I will check in weekly with my intended parents. But some people are, texting 5 times a day, and some people are more in the once a week category. But certainly everybody's communicating around every milestone and every doctor's appointment.
And I think there's some up and downs in communication. Like you'll have some lull periods where you might not hear from your intended parents or vice versa because maybe you just checked in the day before and your cycle hasn't started yet, or you haven't gotten to meds yet. And it's okay. You don't need to check in every day. But it gets really exciting around transfer time. So you'll be texting. The intended parents might come to the transfer. But then, again, first trimester, second trimester, there might be, again, another lull period where you really don't speak as often. And then third trimester hits and conversation ramps up as you get ready for delivery. So I think it's okay to see those like ebbs and flows in talking.
I think, though, that the weekly check-in is kind of standard, even if it is in a lull.
Yeah, totally.
And then some people are, much, much more than that.
I hope you're picking on a key element to surrogacy, and that's that there are a lot of moving parts. There's the matching part, the medical part, the legal considerations. So it's important to reach out for support where you can. If you're a progeny member, well, reach out to us. Your PCA can help you. We have clinical educators and other resources available too. Your team at your fertility clinic should be a really great trusted resource as well. But here's the thing. Any way you slice it, surrogacy is expensive. So we asked what a realistic range is that one can expect.
So unfortunately, surrogacy is super, super expensive. There are 4 things that can make you swing closer to $100,000 versus closer to $200,000+. The first thing is something that's out of everyone's control, which is, does it work the first time? So, and then the second piece is, how much do you pay your service providers, not including, of course, the surrogate's compensation? So, an independent journey, maybe you spent $12,000, but then there's agencies that are charging $50,000, $60,000+, right? So there's a big swing there. The next most material thing, which is a big question mark, is the insurance piece. So on the insurance, if you're lucky enough to have the surrogate have surrogacy-friendly insurance and no liens in the state, your insurance costs could be close to $5,000, right? Just purchasing life insurance and some optional riders. If you're, looking at the Affordable Care Act, it could be $18,000, $19,000 depending on the state. And if you're looking at the private plans, you could be talking about upwards, $30,000 and upwards, depending on whether it's a singleton or a twin pregnancy. And the last piece, which is the big question mark, is how much do you pay the surrogate? So I think most intended parents would say, I want to pay the surrogate a lot, right, and compensate the person who's doing the heavy lifting. And I want to try to keep the service provider costs as low as possible and spend less on insurance, right, because that doesn't feel good to most people. And I want it to work the first time. So those are the 4 things that can get you closer to the $100,000 mark and further away from the $200,000 plus mark.
Of course, all of this is leading up to the big day. Considering both of our guests have experiences on each side of labor and delivery in this context, we asked them both to share what the day was like when the baby arrived.
My daughter was born at the middle of the day on her due date, which is perfectly fitting for her 11-year-old personality now. And about a week before, our amazing surrogate said, I'm starting to feel like things are happening. And she was very in touch with her body. And we didn't want to go sit on her doorstep. So we had family about halfway between New York and North Carolina where she lived. So we spent a very anxious few days. My husband and my mom and I went and stayed with my husband's aunts that lived about halfway in between. And my surrogate was able to say, okay, it's time to come a little bit closer. And we drove down after, I think, 6 days with my husband's aunts. And then we were staying at a hotel that was basically really close to the hospital. And she called the next morning and said, it's time. And my husband and I had no idea what that meant, and neither did my mom, right? So we just went over to the hospital, and she was just such a pro. So it was one push.
That's why she had a home birth.
Yeah, one push. A doula was in the room. Her spouse was in the room. And my husband and I were in a little corner behind, her delivery, trying to stay out of the way, trying to make sure she had everything that she needed, texting our moms, right? My mom was in the waiting room, but saying, we think she's going to push now. And then literally 5 minutes later, wow, my daughter was there. So just comparing that to what happened with when I delivered my son, my husband was like, this is not what it's supposed to look like.
It's a little different.
So, this woman chose surrogacy because she was amazing at this, and she was a pro. And I got to hold my daughter first. She shot out into the world, and my husband cut the umbilical cord, and her husband was there, and it was just the most beautiful moment of my life.
I really wanted to try for a VBAC when I got pregnant for the surrogacy, and it could have been a possibility in the beginning. When we found out it was identical twins, which was not the start of the journey, what we thought, it kind of turned into it was going to be a scheduled C-section at that point, which was totally fine. The dads for that journey, unfortunately, did not make the delivery. My water broke a little bit earlier, and I was frantically calling them. My partner and I, it was in the middle of the night. We had called like 40 times, and they were sleeping. It was, different time zones, and anyways, they made it there about 12 hours later. They were rushing to get on a flight and to come across the country. Because they were twins and they were a little early, they did go to the NICU. And so when the dads got there, they got to go straight to the NICU to see them. And it was wonderful. I mean, even though they missed the delivery, which being a C-section and being a little frantic because my water did break and that wasn't the plan, I'm not sure they would have been able to see much sooner. My second surrogacy at this point was my third C-section, so it was always scheduled to be that way. The dads did make it. They came out like the weekend before. It was really nice. We had dinner the night before, and if you have, people who have had scheduled C-sections, it's kind of like checking into a hotel. You show up at 6 a.m. for your appointment. You just walk on in. Luckily, I was not in labor. I walked into my appointment. The dads, it was up to the anesthesiologist, honestly, if they could be in the operating room. I was comfortable with them being there if they wanted to. My partner was always there with me. He was there for our daughter, the twins, and so he was always going to be my person. And the dads, again, I would have let them come in, but the anesthesiologist said no. He said, we got to keep it business in here, which is totally fine. But they were fully gowned up. They were in the room next door, so as soon as baby was born and they did her checks, the nurse walked her over to the dads who were waiting 5 feet away. I, of course, was still on the operating table at that point, but I really wanted to see the dads see her for the first time, so I remember telling my partner, I was like, take your phone, take a video, go follow the baby, and the anesthesiologist at first was like, he can't leave it was a whole thing. But anyways, I have a beautiful video that he took of them taking the baby over to them. And, even though it was a little more sterile and an operating room, it was still really beautiful. And, it worked out for everyone, I think.
And I'll just say we was born and my surrogate was being, tended to medically, we of course handed our daughter over to her as soon as it was okay to do so, and then we were given our own separate room because it was not New York City, so space was a luxury, and so we were alone. My partner and I were alone in the room with our daughter, and then our amazing surrogate was in a room by herself down the hall, and so we were checking on her, but it was just one night of that, and then she went home the next morning happily, and we got in the car to drive back north to where we lived. I will say one little funny thing that happened was we were in the room with our now 11-year-old, but she was a baby at the moment, and a lovely nurse came into the room and said she was coming in to check on the baby, and she was unaware of the fact that I had not delivered.
Yeah.
And she said, in her North Carolina accent, which I won't even try to say, she said, in my 20 years of working on this floor, I've never seen a mother look as good as you.
Oh, my gosh.
5 hours post-delivery. And I had been through a lot at that point, so I just said thank you.
Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to...
Carly and Sammi are both clearly experts, and it's a level of expertise that doesn't come only from having experienced surrogacy themselves. Carly and Sammi both work for a company called Nodal. As I said, Carly is general counsel and Sammi is the program and community manager. So let's get to know a little bit more about Nodal.
I wish, as a surrogate, I would have known about Nodal before my journeys, but we weren't around yet, and that's okay. The two biggest things that I tell to surrogates that really set Nodal apart, the first one is matching. We allow our surrogates to see multiple families, multiple sets of intended parents, and we allow them to meet with multiple intended parents if they would like as well before ultimately making their decision on who they want to partner with. A lot of traditional agencies do kind of behind the scenes matching, which can be really successful, and it was in my experience. But in the same respect, it doesn't give a fully informed decision on the types of parents that are available. And, even just getting to meet with other people to know the choice that you make is the best one. The second piece is that Nodal does allow their surrogates to create their own personalized compensation plan. I know that can seem a little different when normally the compensation is just laid out in front of you and presented as to what you will be paid. But we really feel that it's not a one-size-fits-all plan, and sometimes that can be, lower or higher or in the middle, and that's okay. We want every surrogate to feel really comfortable with their decision and what they're going to be compensated for, specific line items. So those two pieces alone are, I think, the biggest things that surrogates could really benefit from Nodal's side.
And on the intended parent side with Nodal, I think it's a really special way to find a match, because the first part is that that the surrogate picked you. So they swiped right on you, and then you get to go from there to see whether or not the surrogate would make sense and for your family. But the other thing that I counsel intended parents on is there are a lot of amazing service providers out there. I don't think that you need to spend a whole lot of money to sit on a really long wait list, because I think that there are more efficient, faster ways to match. And Nodal is an amazing option. Some people use us as their only lane, and some people use us in addition to sitting on the long agency wait lists. But it is just really cool to not have the match happen behind a curtain, to have the match, the people who are getting involved into the match in the driver's seats and deciding whose story makes the most sense for them. So I'm very proud of what we're building at Nodal.
I think there is a lot more to unpack when it comes to surrogacy, and I hope that we can produce another episode with Carly and Sammi in the future. If you're interested in surrogacy, whether that means you need a surrogate or if you're thinking about being a carrier for others, you can learn more about Nodal at www.nodal.com. Nodal. And with that, I want to thank Carly and Sammi for sharing their experiences with us here today. And I want to thank you for listening. Remember, the purpose of stories like this isn't to give you a blueprint to how you can build your family, but rather to give you comfort in knowing that you really aren't alone in this journey. There are a lot of people who are going through their own journeys, and while not all endings are the same, we hope you can take some comfort in knowing that there are options out there for support. Thank you for joining us. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. If you want to follow Progeny, you can do that at Progeny Inc. Of course, if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating and review. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progeny. Please remember this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bolger, and this is Infertility.